Thank you so much, Jasmine. And I'm excited to share this information with you. You know, it's kind of the Monty Python of now for something completely different. So we're going to talk about how to address common burnout risks in tech so that you can have these resources available to you. Jasmine did a great job of introducing me. This is my company. We focus on workplace mental health and creating healthy workplaces. And we do that with our affiliates from around the globe. So, as we think about the world of work and where we work, one of the things that we need to keep in front of mind is that for many people, we've experienced a sense of loss. We've had over 1 million people die over the last 2-3 years from COVID. And so we are very much a world in mourning. Unfortunately, that is not the only thing that has happened in the world in the last 3 years. There's been a ton of very stressful and, quite frankly, generation defining situations that have happened, all of which impact us as human beings. And so what we know from the state of burnout in tech research that came out in 2022 is that 2 out of every 5 tech workers has experienced symptoms of burnout, and about 42% of tech workers are anticipating either leaving or missing work due to that burnout, with 62% concerned about the future. So, with all the things that have been happening in the last 3 years, for many of us, we've just kind of acclimated to that level of stress. And we believe, okay, this is fine, right? I can manage through anything. But as we have learned, the world has struggled, and mental health crisis is what's being called by the World Health Organization the second pandemic. So what we also know is we have learned a lot about burnout and burnout causes. One of the things, if you take away nothing else from this talk, is that burnout is real and it isn't new. It's actually been well known and documented since the 1960s. And as part of that research that's been done on burnout and burnout causes, multiple what are called psychosocial hazards have been identified to accelerate the risk of burnout. Things like too much work without having enough time or workload, absence of control over the work that we do, a feeling of insecurity about our jobs, which if you're in a company that has been experiencing layoffs, that's probably a big risk for you right now. A misalignment between the company we work for and our values. So if we see the company we work for do things, make decisions that are counter to our values, that can accelerate our risk of burnout. Also, feeling valued, feeling appreciated for what we do, and seeing a clear alignment with how the work that we do fits with the mission of the organization, and having role clarity, knowing what we're responsible for and how we'll be measured. All of these things create what's called a psychologically healthy workplace. Without them, it accelerates the risk of burnout. Now, as I said, it accelerates the risk of burnout, but it isn't guaranteed to drive burnout. Certain things need to be in the mix for it to actually get all the way to burnout. And that's really very personal. It could be that for some people, working in these spaces isn't as exhausting, but for others it is, especially when combined with all the things that have been happening the last 3 years, which also create an emotional load. So again, in the research that's happened over the last several decades about burnout, there are 3 documented symptoms that would tell us that we are at risk of, or at least have some beginnings of burnout. One is exhaustion, and that's emotional and physical exhaustion, that feeling of just being bone tired. 2 is cynicism, that's distrust in people, not believing in positive intent, etc. And 3, I call it cognition. You'll also see this referred to as performance effectiveness. In other words, things that we used to be really good at seem more complicated or more difficult for us. We get brain fog. So those are 3 symptoms of burnout that you may or may not be aware of. I'm going to skip the videos for this time. So here are 5 hazards for tech professionals that you can keep an eye out for, that are in addition to or very specific to the work that we do in tech. So here's one, and it's exhaustion, especially when we have a lot of work happening at the same time. We have a lot of priorities, lots of conflicting priorities, a big hard deadline. That constant work can lead to burnout. In fact, 56% of people in tech, in the study that we talked about earlier, showed that they had experienced exhaustion as a result of their work. And 69% in that same study said that that had impacted the quality of the work that they do. So one thing to think about is how often you maybe struggle with letting go of the stresses of the day, right? You're thinking about that thing you have to do tomorrow, or you're ruminating on something that happened earlier today. All of these things can become difficult to let go and contribute to the risk of burnout. Number 2 for tech is the pace of change. So this was a quote from a social media post about being able to keep up with the pace of change. So I want to talk about the change curve and how this might show up for us in tech. So the change curve is, how we document that people absorb changes, right? First, we were surprised by those changes. We may go into denial about those changes, and then we're able to absorb it, experiment, adopt new behaviors, new skills, decide if we want to keep moving forward with those changes, and then integrate it into the work that we do. However, if, as in technology, there's a lot of rapid changes, which have happened both during the pandemic when everyone had to move from working on site to being remote, which put a big heavy lift on our tech teams, to evolving technology and moving as quickly as it is, we can experience something called change fatigue. So change fatigue is when I've had so many changes that I haven't had the chance to recover from one before a new one comes on board. And with that, I'm not provided the opportunity to recover from the emotional weight of managing those changes. So change fatigue is definitely something to pay attention to if you have been working in a space that has experienced a lot of change. Quite frankly, I can't think of one situation or one person that I know who hasn't experienced a lot of change. So here are some signs that you may be experiencing change fatigue, or the people around you may be experiencing change fatigue. One is going back and revisiting the value of the work done, or the change being made. When we kind of question that fundamental reason to change in the first place, that might be a sign of change fatigue. Apathy, remember our friend cynicism from being burnt out. So apathy, disconnection, not having emotional investment in making sure we move things forward, being very detached, that's a sign of change fatigue, as you can see cynicism as well. Information hoarding, feeling that I don't want to share information because information is power, and people keeping other people out of the loop, that is another evidence of change fatigue, as is decision making, which can be circular. So if we are constantly rehashing decisions, or we struggle to get to a decision, it could be that we're just waiting for the next change and we push off all these things for the future. And we know when we do that, things tend to pile up. All right. The third hazard for our tech teams that can accelerate burnout is constant threat. So I work with some cybersecurity companies as an example. Cyber attacks, according to this study that came out this year, cyber attacks arouse equally high levels of psychological distress as conventional warfare. And what they've shown is people who have dealt with a cyber attack have symptoms of post traumatic stress in much the same way as people who've experienced other traumatic events. So, those constant threats of being attacked impact our mental health. In fact, a study from last year showed that 54% of people who work in that space say that attacks have had a negative impact on their mental health, and that 56% say that work is getting more and more stressful every year. Number four is people make things messy. This came from an article from CIO magazine this year. So enterprise transformation demands technology to work and people to adopt it. The people component of enterprise transformation can make or break digital transformation. And often when we just tell people about the change, that's not enough to drive a change in behavior, especially if those same people are struggling with change fatigue. I'm going to skip the video. Managing people and getting people aligned can create a lot of stress for our tech teams. Finally, our fifth hazard is something called imposter syndrome. And this can be pretty prevalent in the tech space because of the rapid change in technology and the volume of information that we are expected to absorb. So this came from that study, The State of Burnout in Tech, that came out in 2022. I found, the little negative voices in my head that start getting louder until I feel consumed by self-doubt. And that imposter syndrome is real. In fact, 87% of IT professionals in this study that looked across 5 countries believe that hard skills for their jobs will significantly change within the next 5 years. So the things that I know today will be irrelevant 5 years from now. And keeping up with that, again, we mentioned, can increase our risk of burnout. A study of tech employees who experience imposter syndrome showed that 58% of tech employees struggled with imposter syndrome. And I wanted to show you some examples of the types of companies that they worked at. All right, so those are some hazards to look out for. Let's talk about some things that you can do to help bolster yourself and prevent burnout. The big thing for you to focus on is something called workplace courage. And so there are 4 things that you can do to help invest in creating a psychologically safe workplace, which will help you better navigate these stressors. One is to create connection between yourself and the work that's being done in the workplace. Make sure that you're clear about how the work you do ties back to the mission of the organization. Connect with others and include others. Look for ways to create belonging with people who are different than you. Creating the connection of the work that you do with others helps create spaces that can tolerate higher risk. You can raise questions, you can challenge each other, etc., because you know that you are working towards the same goals. The second way that you can try to bolster against a burnout in the workplace by building courage is to create relationships with others. I know it doesn't make sense. I'm working in systems. You just told me people are hard. Why would I spend more time with people? Well, here's the thing. For 200,000 years as humans, we evolved to live in communities. We are feeling creatures who also think. So we have a biological need to have relationships with the people we work with and collaborative workplaces. So how do we do that? Get to know each other. Get to understand the other person. Find ways in which you're connected, where you share interests. Get to know what their needs are so you can find ways to communicate and relate with one another. I mentioned collaboration earlier. Research shows that I increase my psychological health at work when I work collaboratively with people I trust. And so finding opportunities to give and take with other people, to practice leaning into your strengths and sharing your strengths with others, as well as identifying the strengths that you need from other people, can help you create that courage, because you're fostering an environment where you can take risks and ask questions. You're creating a history, you're building that foundation out, which you can lean on later on when things get stressful. And speaking of when things get stressful, the fourth way that you can build courage and psychological safety at work is by providing support to other people. Research shows that when we help others, it gives us a higher sense of well-being. So think about somebody on your team who may be struggling. Maybe there's somebody who you appreciate, but you haven't articulated it recently. Or maybe somebody needs help and you have a solution or a tip that you learned from a HashiTalk that you can share with them. Find ways to help the people you work with. So, and again, what we're doing is we're creating a psychologically healthy workplace so that when things are stressful, which we have high hazards that they will be, we can lean on those during those times. So one thing I want you to think about when you're back at work is, how will you practice being courageous today? I'd love to see some of those ideas pop up in the chat. Think about somebody that you need to deepen a relationship with, someone that you'd like to collaborate with, or somebody whose strengths you could leverage, someone who's in need of help, or just better understanding and clarifying how the work that you do connects back to the needs of the business. That's it for me. I'm Dr. Alessandria Polizzi. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also on TikTok as Dr. Al Polizzi, and I share lots of topics as your HR big sister.